Hello and welcome to my stream. Today I'm going to be going through this cherry blossom snow here that I built yesterday. So this took me about 40 minutes to build yesterday. It uses HTML, CSS and JavaScript. And today my plan is to split those into separate files and walk through what each of the different parts in those files do. So I'm just going to dive straight in. So you can see here that this HTML file, it starts with some CSS. It then has some JavaScript, and it doesn't actually have very much HTML because the HTML is added by the JavaScript. So let me just start by showing you what happens if I remove different parts of this file. So I'm going to start by, for example, removing the style, just so you can see what happens if I remove the style tag. Well, you can see that I get these scroll bars here, and these move around a bit, but other than that, it's like an empty file. So let me try, instead of removing everything, let me try by just removing, say, a few of the styles. So if I was to remove, for example, the animation, the keyframe, then you'll see I got this black background. Or if I was to remove, for example, the border radius, so you can see here, I think this is a good place to start. If I remove these border radius properties on the CSS, then, okay, now we've got flying squares. And if I was to remove, for example, the transform property on the petal, it changes it a little bit again. If I remove, here we go, so now we've got flying squares. If I remove position relative, I don't think anything will happen. Now let me remove this animation here. Okay, so if we remove the animation, the whole animation stops working, which is interesting. You'd think that, well, we've got, let's try this, removing this one as well. Okay, so I think this is a good place to start for me to explain what something does. So this animation here, you can see if I add it back in, then these start blowing around in the wind, whereas if I remove this line here, then these kind of just spin around on the spot. So what's happening here? Well, when I add this line here, what I'm doing is I'm setting an animation on each of these boxes. These are petals. And so the reason that is each of these boxes are actually, they correspond to a single div element. And so if you were writing HTML, what you'd see is something like, for each of these boxes, I'd have a div like this. And in fact, if I open up this and if I right click on one of these and click inspect element, I can get this thing called the inspector. And what you'll see is I've actually got a lot of these petal divs. And these are added by the JavaScript. So I'm not going to go into how those get added by the JavaScript just yet, but you can see, I guess, from looking at that inspector that, in fact, each of these little spinning pink boxes corresponds to one div, which are getting added and removed incredibly fast. Okay, so I've got all these boxes, and by adding, each of them has this petal class. So each of them is going to have the styles, which are defined by this block here. And so if I remove this animation, then we get this. And if I add it back, we get this. So why is it that this animation property makes these boxes fly in the wind as opposed to spinning in place? Well, to figure that out, let me go through exactly what this means. So this is saying that we're applying an animation to each box with a duration of 2 seconds. So that animation from start to finish, it's going to take 2 seconds. It's got a timing function of ease out, which means it's going to, the animation is going to go faster at the start and then it's going to slow down to slower at the end. And you can see what happens if I change this to linear, which means it's the same speed throughout the whole thing, is, well, you can see that these are taking the same speed now as if I change this to ease out, they sort of gradually slow down, which I think looks a lot nicer. And then there's this arc. What does arc mean? Well, the thing is, arc could actually doesn't really have any particular meaning. All it is doing is it's linking this animation to this set of keyframes here. So let me show you that by just changing this to X. I can call this anything, and it's still going to behave exactly the same. So I'm going to change that back to arc because I think that's a little bit more descriptive. Again, if I remove the arc animation, they stop arcing. So I'm going to keep that in. And so obviously, these 5 lines are very important to this animation. And I can show you that if I remove this transform line. That's going to have exactly the same effect as removing the animation completely. So why is that? Well, you can see here that what this line does is it says that when the animation is complete, each of these boxes is going to be rotated by 0 degrees. It's going to have no rotation. Now, the interesting thing is you'd think at the start that there would be no rotation. So why is it that... Honestly, I'm not exactly sure why this works myself at the moment. Sometimes this happens. I can't even remember what I did last night. So at 100%, we're rotating by 0 degrees. I remember now, sorry. So one of the interesting things about this animation here is not all of the styles are defined in this CSS here. Just like I showed you earlier that the divs are added by JavaScript, they're not actually visible in the raw HTML. Some of the styles as well are added by JavaScript. So if you have a look at this little section here, these 4 lines, what you'll see is I'm actually setting 4 CSS properties on each of these dynamically. I'm setting them using JavaScript. So let me walk through what I'm setting. First, I am setting the left. I'm setting the top. So I'm setting the position that they start at. And I'm setting the transform origin, which is the point around which the transform occurs. I'll get back to this in a moment. And lastly, I'm setting the transform. So I'm setting transform origin and transform based on this thing here. You can see arc radius and arc angle. So let me just tell you what's happening here to start with. So these are basically random numbers. I am setting a random rotation and a random point around which each of these squares rotate. And that's why you can see that, for example, some of these go really fast and some of them go quite slow. But you can imagine, these are set dynamically and they're different for each box, but you can imagine that what's going on is for each, is that I've got a rotation transform with some random number. This is effectively what's happening. And so that's the default position. Oh, that's what happens by default. If I was to remove the animation, as I did before, and let me just remove this as well, and you can see that they're just stuck in one place. And actually, let me do one more thing. Let me comment out this transform line and this transform origin line so you can see what happens. See how when I comment these out, so basically I've removed all of the transform from each of the pedal divs. You can see that they all start facing up. They all start on this kind of angle. Whereas if I add back that random transform, which you can imagine is happening something like, is doing something like this. So this is, you can imagine this is what's happening. I'm not going to say that because that's incorrect code. But you can see now that they're all starting at a random angle. And then if I add the transform origin back in, what this is doing is it's setting the point around which I rotate that div, which I think is quite hard to visualize in this specific example. You can see if I add this back in, so let me just comment this out again. So if I add 2 slashes at the front, that means that's a comment. They now appear all over the screen. Whereas if I uncomment that, because I'm changing the point around which I'm rotating each of these to a random number, then they're all going to appear on this bottom hand of the screen because I'm rotating each of these around some point below them. So that's, I'm going to see if I can find a better way to visualize this later on. But okay, so I think though that should hopefully make clear what this animation is doing. Is without the animation, these boxes will always have the same rotation. They'll always have that random rotation which is added in the JavaScript below. But when I add this animation property in, what happens is that that random animation is slowly animated to 0 over a period of 2 seconds. And just to get an even better idea of what's happening here, let me just try changing this from say 2 seconds to 1 second. And you can see they're moving even faster. I could change it to 0.5 seconds. I don't know, I like 2 seconds. I think it's a little bit more relaxing. And if I add those border radiuses back in, then that'll make it even more relaxing. But before I add the border radiuses back in, before I make them circular, let me show you one more thing here. So each of these boxes is actually composed of 2 separate boxes. So there's a left-hand side and a right-hand side box. And that's why I've got styles for left and right. And I can show you how that works by commenting out these background colors and changing them to a slightly uglier color. So let me go for red and blue. I can't see the blue, but I think it's because it's nighttime here and I've got my screen really yellow. Now I can see it. So you can see here, well, you can see here that there's 2 boxes, but why are there 2 boxes? I think is the question I want to ask. So the reason there's 2 boxes here is because I want to make this kind of oval shape, but I also want there to be some sort of angle at the point where they meet. So if I just wanted to make an oval, what I could do is I could render a single box, add a radius to it so it's a circle, and then use a transform to squish it. But if I want to have that sort of point, I think I need to make it with 2 boxes. And I'll show you how to do that. So I'm going to re-add this border radius, border top left radius, no, for the right hand side it's the top right radius. Let me make this, if I just use a really large number, it's just going to round it as much as possible. And so you can see this is a half circle on this side, and I'm going to do the same thing over here. Okay, and the other thing I need to do is I need to squish these into place. So you can see that the left one has, well, they both have the same height and they both have the same width, but for some reason I'm putting the left one 6 pixels over I'm putting the right one on top of the left one, and you can see that now that I've got them as different colors. But the reason I'm doing that is because I want to squish them both to half the width to get that shape that I'm looking for. So to squish them, I just add a transform. Do transform scale X, because X is the horizontal axis, and I just set it to 0.5. And I can do the same here. And now you can see I get this shape that I was looking for, where there's like a point at the top. And when I showed this to a Japanese friend, there's like, they've got to put the little black triangle in as well. So that's going to be harder, because then I'd probably have to overlay a triangle or use a mask or something. So I'm just going to leave it like this for today. And I'll change these colors back. Oops, that's the wrong one. And there we go. Sakura snow, cherry blossom snow. So that's, I've gone over a few of these. I've gone over the transform. I think the width and the height and background color are pretty obvious. I think it's reasonably obvious what this all does. You've seen how the arc works. I think you probably know what the background color on the body is for. That just changes the background color. Maybe it's okay without a black background, but I'm going to keep the black background because it's easier to see. What about this overflow hidden? Why have I got overflow hidden here? So let me remove it just so you can get an idea. So if I remove it and refresh this, what's going on here? I don't know if you can even see it with the way I've got my stream set up, but I've got all these scroll bars and they keep changing size. So why is that? It's really odd, right? So to show you why well, let me first explain what overflow hidden does. Overflow hidden on the body says that I don't want any scroll bars on the main window. But why is it that I have to do this in the first place, right? Why do I have to even add that? Why are these scroll bars appearing? Let me add some background colors to show you why that is. So I'm going to start by adding a background color to the petal. I hope this is going to work. Okay. Maybe this is not going to work. Oh, this is not working as well as I hoped, but actually I just needed to scroll down and it makes it obvious. See these petals, because of how they're positioned randomly, I didn't need to add these in the first place. That was a bit silly of me. Okay, yeah, you can see that these petals are all the way down here because of the random positioning, and so I can add overflow hidden. Let me explain why I tried to add those background colors. Sometimes when you're using these transforms, you get these big boxes which you need to, well, you wrap these petals in other boxes which are bigger and you transform them, but that's not how it happened this time. This only needed, this is because the petals are like down here. I think that's really reasonably obvious too. So let me move on instead of digging myself a hole. Okay, so we've seen this, we've seen left and right, we've seen petal, we've seen animation, we know what the overflow hidden is for. What about this last animation? This animation rotate. So this has the same duration, it has the same timing function, and in fact, if I set this to linear, not much looks like it's changed. In fact, it could even maybe look nicer with linear. But let me try changing this duration just so you can get, I guess, a more visual understanding of what's going on here. Oh, this is odd. These are kind of just sitting here. Oh, I see, because this is a 20-second animation. So I've made it so this rotation is taking 20 seconds instead of... Let me change it to like a really short time. So you can see these are spinning around really fast. Okay, so this is the keyframes here. So there's two parts to this. One is that this animation is not just rotate. It should be called rotate and fade. And again, these can be called whatever you want, so it's important to name them to be obvious. And so by speeding this up, by lowering the duration, the fade out happens really fast. But you can also see that this is spinning really fast, and that's what the rotate is. Actually, in this animation, I'm spinning them on their own axes. So on this arc one, I'm spinning them on around an origin which is below the petal. So if the petal is here, this is the place I'm spinning it around. So I'm making this arc. Whereas on this rotate one, I'm not setting the origin. And just to prove that, you can see I'm setting transform origin on petal, but not on petal inner. And so because I'm not setting the origin, it's just rotating around the center. So we've got two kinds of spinning. We've got one around this other place, and then we've got one where the petal itself is spinning. And I'm also scaling it out, so I'm just slowly making it get a little bit smaller as it fades out. So let me put this back up to 2 seconds. Okay, so that's the styles. I think if you've got any questions, by the way, if there's anything else about the style you want me to explain, then please send a message in the chat here, and I'll try and keep my eye on it. But otherwise, I'm going to go on to this. Just remove this, which I added earlier. I'm going to go into this script. So what does the script do? And the script is very important to this, because the script is the reason that it can have so many petals and how they can be added and continuously added with these different, I guess, parameters to the animation. But to show you where that is, let me remove the script and do this and add some petals manually. So I'm going to show you what the script is doing by doing it myself. So I'm going to start off by just commenting out this script. So this is how you comment out some lines in JavaScript. Well, one way, there's multiple ways. And I'm going to manually do what this is doing. So this is creating a bunch of elements, as you can see. So I'm going to just follow this. I'm going to create a left element, and that has a class name of left. And I'm going to create a right element, which has a class name of right. There's inner element, and you can see that the left and right are appended to inner, which kind of means that inner wraps these two. So you get it like this. And then this inner element is appended to petal, which is kind of like the outer wrapper element and has this class name of petal. So that's the outer one. So this code here is all used to create some HTML, which looks like this. So if I save that and refresh this, you'll see what happens with a single petal. This is what the animation looks like without any of these random numbers added to it. But so how do I add these random numbers in HTML? What is this actually doing? It's adding something called a style attribute. And so setting a random number for top. So let me just show you for top and left, I should say. So let me show you, for example, what that does. So depending on where the top and left are, the position which this appears is going to change. And it's also setting a transform origin, which looks like this. Instead of having a capitalized O, it'll have a dash, a hyphen, when you set this as CSS as opposed to doing it with JavaScript. And this sets the origin as a pair of XY coordinates. So the X is 0, which means we're rotating, well, the X is 0 and the Y is a random number, which means we're rotating around a point below that petal. So let me just use the number of 200. And the thing is, well, this doesn't actually change anything because we haven't added any rotation yet. So that's the final thing which this script does, is it adds a transform property to the styles with a random rotation. So let me add that, and I'm going to just say 30 degrees. There you go. That's one petal. Now, let me add a few more petals. That's 4. I'm gonna just make 3 because these take a while to add. I'll set this one to 100, so this is gonna rotate around a point 100 pixels below, and this one 300 pixels below. And this one is gonna transform. This is gonna go over an arc of 60 degrees, and this one 90 degrees. So let's save this and see what happens. So one of them starts all the way off the screen. Let me just move this one a little back further so you can see it. Okay, there we go. So one thing you'll notice about doing it this way, when I add these divs as raw HTML, instead of adding them with this script here, is that they all are added at the same time. All the animations start at the same time, and all the animations stop at the same time. And the other thing is obviously that there's only 3 divs, so there's only 3 petals and then it ends. So I think there's 2 important things here that the script adds to this. One is that we can just keep adding petals indefinitely. The other is that they're staggered. So you get one, and then you get the next one, and then you get the next one. Oh, well, there's 3 important things actually, because it's also the randomness. And sure, you can add randomness yourself, but it's not really random. Obviously, it's going to look a lot better if you have real random numbers. So let me explain how those 3 things happen in the JavaScript. So I'm going to uncomment this again. I'm going to just uncomment part of it actually. So if I leave this chunk of JavaScript uncommented, actually nothing is going to change because this is a function, and functions, they kind of denote a block of code which you can call over and over again, but you have to call it. You have to manually tell the browser that you want this piece of code to be run, and I haven't done that here. I've done that within the commented section. And the reason I put this as in a function is obviously because I want to keep adding petals, which is why the function is called add petal. So let me just tell you what this does instead of explaining it. Obviously this is adding a petal, so this is kind of like adding the div here. Here I remove the petal after 3 seconds, and you have to remove it even if it's not visible, because otherwise if you've got like a million petals, it's going to jam the computer up. So I'll just leave that there. The really important thing is this part here. So if I add this back, we've got the 3 petals which I added, and we've got all these ones, these random ones being added in. Why is that? How is it that this fulfills those 3 things? This adds randomness, it staggers them, and it keeps adding petals indefinitely. What's going on? So let me start with setInterval. So setInterval is a function. It's something just like this add petal function. It's a piece of code which you can call, you can ask to be run. This is built into the browser. So if you want to know how it works, you do the same thing as you do if you want to know how a CSS property or a HTML tag works. You type in mdn setInterval, and you'll get, this is a little bit tricky to figure out that this is what you want, but you can see setInterval here, mdm, and you have a look and you see the setInterval method it repeatedly calls a function or executes a code snippet with a fixed time delay between each call, which is exactly what you want. You want to repeatedly call this add petal function with a delay. So here is the delay. This is 50 milliseconds. I'm running this block of code every 50 milliseconds, and this is the function. So this is another way to define a function just like this, except this thing here with the 2 parentheses and the arrow, this is called an anonymous function. It just doesn't have a name. So basically, this block of code here, what it does is it calls this block of code once every 50 seconds indefinitely. Now, what do these do? Well, this gets the client height, so that's the height of this window, and the client width, which is the width of this window, and it stores it in these 2 constants called height and width. And I went on to constants a couple nights ago when I did the coronavirus flowchart with where it asked you questions and displayed answers. So if you want to see what they are, you can look there, or you can type in mdn const. But basically what I'm doing is I'm making it so when you type in height, you get the height of the window in pixels, and when you type in width, you get the width in pixels. So all that's left is to call add petal. So this is where we tell the browser that we want this block of code to be run. And what I do is I set these numbers, I set the left, the top, the arc angle, and the arc radius to random numbers. So math.random here, this gives a number between 0 and 1. So I'm just, by multiplying a number between 0 and 1 by the width of the window, I'm making the left be anywhere between here and here. I'm doing the same with the top. I'm multiplying a number between 0 and 1. So this is the multiply symbol by the height of the window. So the top is going to be anywhere between here and the top and the bottom. And then I'm picking an arc angle between 30 degrees and 180 degrees, and an arc radius between 150 degrees 150 pixels, because it's the radius, and 300 pixels. And these numbers get passed into here and then used here. The left, the top, the transform origin, and the transform in the styles that I was talking about earlier. And that's everything. This gets called once every 50 milliseconds, which adds a petal once every 50 which calls this add petal function with random numbers once every 50 milliseconds, which adds a HTML element to the DOM, to the page, and which is then styled with these classes that we defined up here. And that's how you make Cherry Blossom Snow. That took me 32 minutes, I think. So it's almost got it done in the 30 minutes I was hoping for. Yeah, if you have any questions, leave a comment or send me a message on Twitter. I'll put a link to my Twitter in the description afterwards if you want to take a look. I'll also put this code on GitHub on a gist. Actually, I did that in yesterday's lesson. So if you want to take a look at the code, it's there, but I'll put that in the description as well. So thank you for watching. Let me just end by messing around with a few things. So I'm going to add more petals, because now I'm doing it once every 25 milliseconds. And I'm going to change the radius a little bit, or the angle. I wonder how many of these I can add. One every 15 milliseconds. I don't know if you've ever seen Cherry Blossom Snow. It really does look like snow. It's quite pretty. Not that we can see it this year because, you know, it's, well, for obvious reasons, we should be staying inside. Which is why I guess it's good to make a digital version. So also, if you make your own Cherry Blossom Snow and you want to share it, then put a link to it in the video comments and I'll tweet about it on Twitter. You can probably make it look nicer than this, so you can mess around with the colors, or you can maybe put that little black triangle into the petals like it's supposed to have. But yeah, that's it for me tonight. So thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye.